Part 9, Mental Concentration. You have heard much of the value and importance of mental concentration. You have in a general way realized that it plays an important part in all perceptive and reasoning processes. You doubtless have felt at times that you lacked the power of mental concentration or, at least, that it would be well if your powers of this kind were more highly developed. You have felt strongly, particularly when your mind has manifested a decided tendency to wander away from the subject or object under consideration, that a greater degree of mental concentration on your part would be very desirable. But, in all probability, you have never stopped to consider just what this power really is. We trust that when you have finished the reading and study of this part of our book you will have a clearer and more definite idea of the nature and meaning of mental concentration and a better understanding of the methods whereby it may be developed and employed. The term, concentration, in its general sense, means, the act or process of bringing, coming, approaching, or directing toward a common point or center or of bringing to or meeting in one point. Mental concentration, then, is bringing and holding the mind to one point of focusing its powers upon a central point. As the average person would express it, it is keeping one's mind on the subject. The ancient Oriental philosophers called it, keeping the mind only appointed. Mental concentration, however, is not a special faculty or power of the mind. It is simply a high degree of voluntary attention. It is voluntary attention manifested in a positive manner, in a quite definite direction, and with a clearly defined purpose. Indeed, in all forms, phases, or degrees of attention there is a certain manifestation of mental concentration, the holding of the mind only appointed. Even in involuntary attention there is some degree of focused attention, and the shutting out of other sensations and perceptions. For example, the child gazing with fascination upon the passing procession, upon the organa grinder and his monkey, or upon the window of the toy store or candy shop. In voluntary attention there is a still greater degree of mental concentration, a greater contraction of the field of consciousness, and a greater limitation of the scope of observation. In the popular conception, the idea of mental concentration is usually associated with the process of holding the mind rigidly and immovably fixed upon some one point. This conception is erroneous. Such a process would soon result in a state of self-hypnosis, and hypnosis would then be the achievement of the highest degree of mental concentration. Such process would have as its end and aim the thinking of nothing, for the attention so held would speedily develop a state of dim consciousness, soon passing into samya consciousness, and finally into unconsciousness. Mental concentration, in the true sense, is not this process of thinking of nothing, but rather that of intensive thinking of some one subject or object, in its various phases, accompanied by an inhibition or shutting out of other impressions and other thoughts. Mental concentration consists of the three following elements, viz. 1. The application of earnest voluntary attention upon one particular subject or object. 2. The application of perception, observation, apperception and thought upon that subject or object, with the determined and definite purpose of extracting from it all possible information concerning its qualities and relations. 3. The restriction and limitation of the field of attention by means of a determined inhibition or shutting out of other sensations, perceptions, and thoughts. This third element, usually ignored in popular thought on the subject of mental concentration, is really the characteristic and most essential element involved in the process. Mental concentration calls into action the power of the will. For that matter, voluntary attention, as its name indicates, is distinctly an act of will. Mental concentration, as we have said, is merely an intensive form of voluntary attention. It is voluntary attention, only a little more so. In ordinary voluntary attention, the will acts so as to direct and hold the attention upon a particular subject or object. In mental concentration, the will manifests itself especially in the coordinate action of keeping out of the field of consciousness other impressions, perceptions, and thoughts. In this dual action there is obtained, 1. Keeping in mind the selected subject or object, and 2. Keeping out of the mind all other subjects or objects. Mental concentration imposes a continuity of attention to the same subject. But this continuity of attention is by no means fully ensured by the mere act of keeping in mind the selected subject or object of thought. It requires also the keeping out of the mind all disturbing or distracting influences. If the will relaxes its hold upon the attention, then the latter is quite likely to be attracted to and carried away by some of the countless thoughts, ideas, or notions which constitute the stream of thought, and which are brought into consciousness by means of the law of association. In order to secure efficient mental concentration, the will must be trained to prevent the attention from being seduced, allured, enticed, decoyed, inveigled, and led astray by attractive passing thoughts. Gordy brings out this idea very clearly in the following passage: as you use your will to give your attention to geometry, although it attracts you less than a number of other subjects, so if you really study it, you will use your will to prevent your mind from being dragged away from it by the interests that are constantly importuning you. He who possesses this power in a high degree possesses in a high degree the power of voluntary attention to give steadiness to the mind, to prevent it from going capriciously here and there under the influence of the interests that happen to be present at the particular moment. The secret of mental concentration, then, is seen to consist of the manifestation of its essential characteristic, the added characteristic superimposed upon those of ordinary voluntary attention, namely, that of keeping out, shutting out, or inhibiting the influence of distracting, disturbing, and diverting outside thought, or other ideas. Voluntary attention, once directed and held by the will upon a certain object or subject, will readily permit the efficient activity of perception, apperception and thought, provided that by mental concentration the other or outside attractions are shut out and kept out of consciousness. We ask you to consider carefully, and to fix in your mind, this fact of the importance of the shutting out and keeping out process. If you will acquire the knack of this keeping out and shutting out process, you will have mastered the art and science of mental concentration, for voluntary attention will do the rest for you. A writer on the subject of practical psychology has aptly compared this shutting out process to the act of placing blinkers on a horse. The blinkers prevent the horse from seeing things which are likely to disturb, distract, or divert his attention from his business of life. They shut out and keep out the sensations and perceptions of other and outside things. They narrow his field of attention, and therefore limit and concentrate his area of present consciousness. They render him practically blind to distracting, diverting and disturbing sights, hence they are sometimes called blinders, and are defined as leather screens on the bridle, serving to hinder a horse from seeing objects at the side. If you wish to develop your power of mental concentration, you should acquire the knack of applying these mental blinkers or blinders, and should habituate yourself to their employment at times in which concentrated thought is desirable. Mental concentration is a valuable instrument of efficient perception, observation and thought. Its value arises from the fact expressed in that axiom of psychology which states that, the fewer the objects observed at one time, the greater is the intensity of the concentrated voluntary attention employed in the observation. It greatly magnifies the powers of the perceptive and reflective faculties of the mind, because it diminishes the area of the field of attention. It gives a steadiness to the mind, and bestows a wonderfully increased power of accomplishment upon the faculties involved in the mental processes. In one way, mental concentration may be compared to the microscope which makes mentally visible the minute details of the observed object. In another way, it may be compared to the telescope which brings the observed object nearer to the eye of the mind. The best way of beginning to develop mental concentration is that of acquiring the habit of thinking of, or doing, but one thing at a time. Such habit, in itself, is valuable and tends directly toward efficiency and economy of thought. The opposite habit results in squandering time and energy. Many prominent men have testified to the value of attending to but one thing at a time, giving to it the undivided attention for the time being, then withdrawing that attention completely and focusing it upon the next thing to be observed or considered. Lais says, "It is necessary in mental concentration that one single impression at a time shall be imprinted on the sensorium, and that the elements of the sensorium themselves shall be in a kind of silence and receptive calm." Kay says, "It is as one is able to shut out every other object from the mind, every idea, even that of self, that he attains the highest degree of mental power." If we would possess the power of concentrated attention to a high degree, we must cultivate the habit of attending to what is directly before the mind, to the exclusion of all else. All distracting thoughts and feelings that tend to withdraw the mind from what is immediately before it are therefore to be avoided. This habit of attending to but one thing at a time has, also, another valuable feature, i.e., that of enabling you to put out of your mind, to shut out and keep out of mind the subject or object which you previously have been considering but which you have now laid aside for the time being. By means of this habit, you are enabled to put that subject or object into its appropriate compartment of the mind, to shut that compartment and to keep it closed until you once more wish to examine its contents. With all the other mental compartments closed, you will be able to examine, consider and decide upon the contents of the particular one which you have now before you. This ability to put aside subjects and objects of thought when one is through with his present consideration of them, thus shutting the particular compartment of the mind containing them, is one of the marked powers of men and women who have attained prominence in the various fields of human endeavor. Many prominent persons, analyzing the causes of their success in efficient perception, observation, thought and action, have attributed it largely to this power which they have acquired by practice and through habit. To be able to take your mind off a thing, when you are through with it, is quite as important as to be able to put your mind on a thing, when you wish to observe or consider it. We advise you to acquire, by practice and exercise, the faculty and habit of attending to but one thing at a time, and that of passing from that thing to another, when you wish to do so, with ease and facility, but never carrying the loose end of thought of one thing over into the thought of the next thing. Napoleon, that great master of mental concentration, frequently said that his mind was like a great chest of many drawers. When he wished to consider the contents of any particular drawer, he pulled it out. When he was through considering these, he closed the drawer and then kept it closed until he wished to open it once more for a definite purpose. He was careful not to mix the contents of the respective drawers, and he never had two drawers opened at the same time. The senior J. Pierpont Morgan is said to have developed by training a similarly efficient mind. When he was considering a subject, he regarded it with absolute mental concentration. When the consideration was concluded, he dismissed it completely from his field of conscious attention, and turned to some other subject. Granville said, "A frequent cause of failure in the faculty of concentrated attention is that of striving to think of more than one thing at a time." Beattie says, "While employed on any one subject, our thoughts should not wander to another. This rule holds good of our rest, play or recreation, as well as of our work. When we go to the fields of exercise, we should leave all our speculations behind, otherwise we will fatigue the body and distract the mind, and will confirm ourselves in those habits of inattention which, when persisted in, constitute what is called an absent-minded person." What at first may seem an exception to the rule of mental concentration is found in the fact that often one finds himself better able to concentrate upon a subject or object when his attention is faintly stirred by something else, by something of but slight interest, such as, for instance, a dull sermon, a piece of light music, or the voices of persons engaged in idle or light conversation. This apparent exception, however, when rightly understood, is really a verification of the rule rather than an exception to it. It is explained by the well-known fact that a slight stimulus often serves to attract feebly and hold lightly the idle, involuntary attention to keep it busy, thus preventing it from being attracted by stronger and more active sensory or representative stimuli which would tend to distract, divert and disturb the voluntary attention from its definite task. We once heard a lady explain this process as follows: "It is like giving the baby an empty spool to play with, in order to keep it out of mischief." This furnishes the explanation of the familiar phenomenon of a person whittling a stick, or drawing figures on a sheet of paper, in order better to think about a thing under consideration. It also gives the reason for the fact that many a time, while listening to a dull sermon, uninteresting lecture, or tiresome play, one is able to think out certain problems or questions which have previously been too much for him. Thus the dull preacher, or his brother in other fields of public work, often is a blessing in disguise, though few such would appreciate a testimonial to this effect. In the earlier stages of our present consideration of this particular subject, we directed your attention to the fact that mental concentration is not a state of thinking about nothing, but rather is one of intense thinking about something. That something, however, does not consist of some one indivisible point of thought or perception. If it were this, then the conscious attention would soon flag, and a state of lessened consciousness, such as drowsiness or even sleep, would intervene. Continued focused attention upon an indivisible point, or upon any other abstract thing, would result in at least some degree of self-hypnosis, unless sleep asserted itself. The one thing must be a concrete thing, i.e., an actual thing made up of parts, elements, factors. Hazlitt says, concentration does not, as popularly supposed, mean keeping the mind fastened on one object or idea or in one place. It consists in having a problem or purpose constantly before one. It means keeping our thought moving toward one desired end. Mental concentration is not like a stagnant pool of water. It is not motionless, it is in constant and continuous motion, intense motion. It is like an active, swift whirlpool, abiding in one place or point in the stream of thought. Its whirls draw to it all that it needs from the mental waters around it. It moves, is always moving, yet it moves not from its own place. This leads us to a reference to the laws of attention set forth in the preceding section of this book, for in the understanding and application of those principles is to be found the effective working method of mental concentration. These laws of attention, stated briefly, are as follows. 1. The law of interest, whereby the presence of a lively interest is a necessary factor of the manifestation of attention. 2. The law of variety of stimulus, whereby the element of novelty is a necessary factor in the manifestation of the continuation of attention. 3. The law of physical strain, whereby the element of breaking up the object or subject of attention is necessary in order to avoid the exhaustion of the nervous mechanism employed in attention. 4. The law of rest, whereby the element of variation in the direction of the attention is necessary in order to comply with the requisites of the respective laws of interest, variety of stimulus, and physical strain. Reference to the detailed statement of the laws of attention, appearing in the concluding pages of the previous section of this book, is advised at this stage of your study of the present phase of voluntary attention, the phase of mental concentration. Now, then, in your practice of mental concentration, you will find it practically impossible to observe these laws of attention if you attempt to concentrate continuously upon an abstract idea, i.e., upon the idea of a subject or object lacking concreteness, divisibility, and analysis into parts, elements and factors. For this reason, such attempted continued concentration of attention results in lessened conscious, or even in sleep, self-hypnosis, or unconsciousness of some kind. But when your subject or object is concrete, and therefore capable of analysis into parts, elements, or factors, then you will find it possible and comparatively easy to observe these laws of attention, and, therefore, to apply efficiently the principle of mental concentration. The best way to proceed to apply these laws and principles is to divide your subject or object under consideration into its several parts, elements, and factors, then to proceed to consider each of these constituent groups in regular logical order, passing from one to another when weariness, lessened activity, and decreased power of concentration manifest themselves. In this way, and in this way alone, is it possible for you to maintain continuous interest, variety of stimulus, avoidance of physical strain, and to obtain rest for the attention. The variety of stimulus provides a continuous interest, avoids physical strain, and provides rest for the attention. Here, also, we ask you to refer to that section of this book entitled Observation and Experiment, and to note the rules of observation therein presented. Note, especially, the reference to the whole and the parts, combined observation, visualized observations, naming observations, and the general rule. These rules of observation should be observed by you in your practice of mental concentration. The rule of the whole and the parts points at the course to be pursued in your mental concentration. If you would observe the laws of attention and observe them, you must, if you wish to attain efficient mental concentration, you should concentrate first on the more general aspect of the subject or object under consideration, the thing as a whole. But this whole must be a real whole, made up of parts, elements and factors, and not merely an abstract whole thought of as existing in, of, and by itself. For instance, if you wish to concentrate upon the subject house, you must concentrate upon an actual house, a real house, either one in existence, one which has been in existence, or one which is possible of being in existence, made up of all the constituent parts of a house, not of the abstract idea of house. It must be a house, and not merely house, the latter being a mere word, name or term, and not the representation of a real or possible thing. Read over this statement until you get it, until you catch the idea. Abstract things have no real existence outside of abstract thought. Only concrete things actually exist, or can so exist. Abstract ideas, in the words of the popular humorist, are all right, but they don't mean anything. From your concentrated consideration of the whole of your subject or object, then proceed to concentrate upon the leading parts, elements or factors of that whole. Exhausting this, or feeling fatigue or loss of interest, then proceed to a minor or subordinate class of parts, elements or factors, and so on, and on, and on, until finally you have given concentrated attention to all the parts, elements, and factors of that whole. This may take more than one sitting. In most cases it will require many such. Keep at it, however, until you have sucked the juice from the orange, or extracted the meat from the egg. Let your ideal end and purpose be to exhaust the subject or object of all possible information concerning all of its qualities and relations. Let your method be to work from the whole to its parts, from general to particulars. Pursue the investigation along the lines of analysis, i.e., that of analyzing, dissecting, separating, taking apart, resolving and refining the subject or object into its constituent, composing, correlated parts, elements, and factors, and into the disclosure of its relations and associations. The nearer you come to this, the closer will you be to the attainment of your ideal end and purpose, aim and intention. You will be helped in your task if you will hold before you the concrete, actual illustrative example of the pupil of Agassiz, of whom we have told you. Finally, never overlook the all-important fact that interest is the arouser and maintainer of attention and its corollary. Interest may be aroused, increased, and maintained by attention. The endless chain of efficient observation and perception is composed of these links: interest, attention, interest, attention, interest, attention, interest, attention, interest, and so on ad infinitum. Interest always precedes attention, and attention always precedes interest. Like the familiar argument in the old time debating societies, in which the question of which comes first, the chicken or the egg, is never answered, so is it impossible to say which comes first, interest or attention. It is like the old song, we're here because we're here because we're here because, etc. There is no beginning, and no ending. The endless chain is endless because it has no ends, i.e., because it is like a ring or circle, having no point of beginning or ending. And now, once more let us remind you that you are the creator of your world of experience. You create it with that instrument which you call your mind. Create it well. The best that is within you should be devoted to the task. Build it strong, build it wide, build it high. Be not content with the narrow expanse of the world of experience of the average man. Build it wide, and then continue to widen and expand it so long as you live. Be not content with the lowlands of knowledge, and with a limited view to which you are restricted by life on the lower planes of perception. Insist upon ascending the mount of achievement, around which winds the path of knowledge. At each turn of the spiral road you will obtain a fuller and wider view of the surrounding country, a more comprehensive vision, a truer perspective, by means of which you may more intelligently, and more justly, estimate the comparative proportions and value of the things on the plains, or planes, below. So build your world of experience that, when it is completed, you may be able to gaze upon it and say, it is a good and well-built world. I have done my best. The best that I have found within me is represented in it. In conclusion, let us remind you that in the development and cultivation of perceptive power, as in every other task set by human desire and executed by human will, you will proceed more satisfactorily if you will bear in mind and act upon the principle of the master formula of attainment, which forms an important element of the instruction contained in the personal power books, of which the present volume is one. The master formula of attainment is as follows: 1. Definite ideals, 2. Insistent desire, 3. Confident expectation, 4. Persistent determination, 5. Balanced compensation. Reduced to popular terms, it is as follows: you may have anything you want, provided that you 1. Know exactly what you want, 2. Want it hard enough, 3. Confidently expect to obtain it, 4. Persistently determined to obtain it, and 5. are willing to pay the price of its attainment. The cultivation and development of perceptive power also meets the requirements of the touchstone of positivity, which is frequently referred to in the several books forming this series. The touchstone of positivity is the following test question applied to any and every undertaking contemplated by you: will this make me stronger, better, and more efficient? That well-developed and cultivated perceptive power will tend to make you stronger, better, and more efficient is self-evident. That you will be able to develop and cultivate perceptive power is assured, provided that you know exactly what you want it hard enough, confidently expect to attain it, persistently determined to obtain it, and are willing to pay the price of its attainment. Finis.